CEO Daddy. Chapter 1241. She has a boyfriend. Alan and Anne's wedding ceremony had come to a perfect end. With the witness of their family and friends, this beautiful memory was deeply engraved in each other's hearts. Inside the office, Alvina Miller was still busy working hours. Her English was very good, and the guests she received were fluent, warm and cheerful, and she was prized a few times. Alvina Miller's English was really good. It did not carry any accent at all, adding her sweet voice. Very quickly, there was someone who was jealous of her. There was no helping it. Wherever women gathered, there would always be ripples. Alvina Miller's job was gradually entering a better state, but she did not expect that her superior, Carl Black, arranged a very important matter for her, whether to make trouble for her or really to affirm her abilities. In the afternoon, Mr. Vice President would meet with the foreign leaders and would need the help of staff to accompany them. Alvina Miller and a few other girls had been selected, and among them was Kelly, who was filled with resentment towards Alvina Miller. Those 6 girls were standing in line to accept Carl's words. Alvina Miller was originally thinking that Carl Black had given her the chore once again, but when she heard the words Vice President, a flash of light appeared in her beautiful big eyes. After working here for so many days, apart from the last time she'd met him outside the conference room and poured coffee on him, she really hadn't seen him again. Although Joseph had previously said that he had stood at the entrance of the cafeteria for a long time, it was a pity that she did not know of this matter. This could not be considered as having met face to face. Alvina never thought that she would actually want to follow him and do things by his side. Thinking of this, Alvina Miller grinned. Alvina Miller, be more serious. Carl Black stared at her face, sternly warning her. Yes. Alvina Miller immediately raised her head and straightened her back, answering with a loud and clear voice. This is not a joking. You should do your best. This time, the guests are from foreign countries. For the sake of our country's reputation, you are not to make any mistakes, and especially you, Alvina Miller. You are a new person. I have arranged for you to do things at such an important place. I hope you can learn from Senior, and not make any mistakes like last time. Carl Black immediately reprimanded her. I promise not to. In order to have the chance to work closely with Joseph Grant, Alvina Miller agreed to all of her conditions. Kelly, who was standing at the side, rolled her eyes. She didn't know why she couldn't bear to look at Alvina Miller, but she couldn't bear Alvina because Alvina was a rich family's young miss, who drove a sports car to and for every day. Yet Alvina still pretended to be low key and came to fight over the jobs with them. In short, Kelly felt that it was too pretentious of Alvina Miller to come over here, but of course, she would never admit that it was because she was jealous of her good conditions. Kelly felt that if she wanted to live a better life, she would have to find a rich man to marry her. But today, there were some rich men who were pursuing her. It was a pity that her eyesight was too high. For those ordinary rich men, she really did not want to see them. Her youth was only once, and her life was also only once. She was so beautiful, so hardworking, so she wanted to be able to find a better man to live a better life. Alright, that's all I have to say. Hurry up and go. It's almost time, and the guests are almost here. Carl Black clapped her hands and dismissed the group of people. Alvina Miller knew that Kelly did not like her, and she felt guilty in her heart. She would still go and greet her. Kelly, the two of us are in the same group. Can we take care of each other? Aren't you very capable? Do you still need me to take care of you? Kelly coldly replied. Her so-called ability was good because Alvina Miller was proficient in more than just English. She was also proficient in the Six Nations languages. That was why Alvina Miller gained a firm foothold in this job. She was even more so worthy of admiration and admiration. We're a small team after all. No matter how good I am, my abilities are limited. Alvina Miller continued to smile modestly. Alvina Miller, I don't understand. Your family should be very rich. Why would you come here to work with us? Are you going to work here for a few months and then go home and continue your career? Kelly was really curious about her identity, because she had inquired before, but Alvina Miller's identity was still quite secretive. Hearing her question, Alvina Miller immediately laughed dryly, and her face reddened. If I say that I come here to work for the man I want to marry in the future, would you think that I'm funny? Are you getting married? Kelly was surprised by her words. More or less, but we're still adapting to each other. Alvina Miller replied with a smile. So, you already have a boyfriend? When Kelly heard that Alvina was not alone anymore, and that Alvina would not fight with her over the vice president, Kelly was a little happy. After all, Alvina Miller had accidentally dirty vice president's clothes last time, so Kelly was worried that the vice president would have a deep impression of her. I guess so. A pair of unfathomable eyes surfaced in Alvina Miller's mind. She wasn't sure if she really did or not. After all, she and Joseph Grant didn't be the lover, and she didn't really understand that man. It was unknown whether or not she could become lover with him in the future. Kelly's attitude became a bit more relaxed, and she said indifferently, "Then who is your boyfriend? You should tell me his name." "I'm sorry, I can't say it yet, because we might not actually get married." Alvina Miller was embarrassed. Kelly's expression changed as she thought that even if Alvina Miller didn't say it, she didn't want to know who the other party was. The executive office was so big, and there were over 1,000 men working here, and there were a lot of people born from political or business family. Alvina's family was rich. She must find a man who matched her. In a word, Alvina's was arranged well. Getting married and having children were all like going through the aisle. Kelly immediately thought of herself being alone. She couldn't help but think of the scene half a year ago when she just came to the office to work. At the time, she was riding a bicycle. Because she wasn't familiar with the environment and the road conditions, she was almost hit by a cart midway. She was so scared that her bike fell to the ground. Just as she was about to cry, a gentle and low male voice asked her in concern, "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" Kelly found that it was Mr. Vice President. It was drizzling rain, so Kelly wore a raincoat and was in a sorry state. The Mr. Vice President did not hold an umbrella either, and his assistant finally got on the carriage to get the umbrella, supporting it on top of his head. Joseph Grant extended his hand out and pulled her up from the ground, then got someone to help her carry the carriage. After careful inspection, he discovered that there was no damage done, so he sat in the carriage and left. Kelly's fall had received Joseph's concern. She felt that it was the most valuable thing in her life. She would never forget. When she raised her head, that man's gentle and caring gaze was like a beautiful dream that she wanted to relive every night against the rain and the light. After that, she became even more diligent in her work here. Sometimes, 10 days or even half a month was not enough for her to even catch a glimpse of Joseph, and sometimes, she would accidentally be able to see him and the foreign guest hold a meeting. Quietly, Kelly carefully hid her young girl's thoughts. "Kelly, are you heading this way?" Alvina Miller's voice woke Kelly up. Kelly trembled with fear and hurriedly said, "Hurry, it's too late." Alvina Miller immediately took large strides, and followed closely behind her. When they had finished preparing for the meeting room, they saw a group of people walking over from outside. There were two men leading the group, and one of them was Joseph Grant. Chapter 1242. Who could be more disappointed? "He's coming." Alvina Miller couldn't help but say this in a low voice, but Kelly quickly glared at her, signaling her not to speak carelessly. Alvina Miller understood and quickly shut her mouth, but her pair of beautiful eyes continued to stare at the man. At this moment, Joseph Grant and a head of state were walking towards the conference room while talking. On such an important occasion, Joseph Grant had overturned his expression very much. Even when he was smiling, he looked very reserved and polite, giving people a serious feeling. Alvina Miller and the six beauties also stood at the two sides with a smile on their faces, showing a form of courtesy towards the foreign guests. "Look at me! Look at me! Look at me!" At this moment, Alvina Miller's inner thoughts were only filled with these few words. She did not know why she thought this way, but she was looking forward to see how Joseph Grant would give her a glance, even a white glance. Just as Joseph Grant and the foreign leader walked in front of them, Joseph Grant was able to control himself from looking at the little woman, but when he got closer, he saw her obediently standing there. Her eyes were especially bright, and had a smile on her face that he could understand. Joseph Grant's heart suddenly became chaotic. He didn't know what was wrong. In that moment, he actually heard the words of the person beside him wrongly. Of course, this was only a moment of shock, and Joseph Grant withdrew his gaze at the right time. "He's looking at me." Alvina Miller was a little pleased with herself in her heart. Although Joseph Grant had only glanced over indifferently, Alvina Miller had felt that he had seen her. Alvina Miller was overjoyed, while Kelly, who was standing beside Alvina, was even happier. Kelly's heart was beating very quickly. If she hadn't made a mistake just now, would Vice President look at her and remember her? Kelly could not believe it, but she was so happy that she felt like flying. Joseph Grant and the foreign leaders had already entered the meeting room. Kelly and the other staff members naturally followed along to wait upon them. Of course, they had basically finished their work, and could only send them water when they needed it. "We only need to arrange one person inside. All of you, wait outside." Kelly suddenly stopped a few of her beauties. "Let me go," Alvina Miller said instinctively. There was no other way. She really wanted to see how Joseph Grant worked with her own eyes. "You are a newbie and are not qualified for this job. Let me do it." After Kelly said that, without waiting for anyone else's opinion, she walked in and closed the door softly. "No!" Alvina Miller screamed in pain in her heart. She had even dreamed to see Joseph Grant working. Why did Kelly deprive her of such expectations? Although her heart was in a frenzy, her face was still calm. Some of beauties also complained a bit, but right now, work was the top priority. Naturally, they did not dare to argue too much with Kelly. Joseph Grant sat down on his seat. The first thing he wanted to do was see if Alvina Miller had entered, but when he saw another receptionist entering, a sense of loss flashed past his face. Of course, only he could experience these small emotions. In this kind of environment, no one would reveal their emotions. Not to mention, he was the vice president. When Kelly entered, She felt Mr. Vice President looking at her, the feeling of her heart beating even faster, and her face was flushed red. During the meeting time, Alvina Miller stood outside with a face stiff from laughter. She subconsciously extended her hand to squeeze her face, but she was reminded by someone beside her in a low voice, "Pay attention to your manners, there's a monitor over there. If you're seen by Miss Black, then she will have to talk about you again." Alvina Miller immediately gave up the idea of rubbing her face. She could only continue to stand and maintain her polite smile. After an hour or so, the meeting finally ended. When Alvina Miller saw the staff members come out, followed by the foreign leader and Joseph Grant, the two of them were still chatting with a smile on their faces. Alvina Miller had heard some political words. Joseph Grant was speaking the language of that country, and it just so happened that Alvina Miller could understand it too. She thought that Joseph can speak fluent foreign language. Kelly walked out with a slightly flushed face, and her infatuated gaze stayed on Joseph Grant's tall back for a few seconds. At the meeting room, Joseph asked her for a bottle of water. Kelly was so excited that she cannot control her hand. His hands were trembling all the way. At this moment, Kelly firmly believed that the vice president still had an impression of her, and she would definitely work even harder to make herself more outstanding. She hoped that one day, she would have the chance to come into contact with the Mr. Vice President and leave him with a better impression. Kelly's current dream was not too big. She did not dare ask for anything else. She only hoped that Joseph Grant would remember her and say a few more words to her. "My legs are sore." "Sisters, do you have sore legs?" On the way back to the office, Alvina Miller couldn't help but complain. "It is sore, and it still hurts, but what else can I do? This is the kind of job it is. Yeah, I need to find my guy to help me massage it." It's good to have a boyfriend. If you are tired from work, you can still find him to massage. A bachelor dog like us can only go home and stay warm. The group of beautiful girls covered their lips and quietly laughed. The scene was exceptionally beautiful. When Kelly heard the word boyfriend, her face flushed red again. Alvina Miller, on the other hand, squinted her eyes and smiled towards the window. That was right. Why didn't she think that his boyfriend would have such uses? When she got back, she must find Joseph Grant to help her massage it. However, Alvina didn't know whether the noble hands were willing to help her rub it or not. Alvina Miller felt that she might be daydreaming. How could Joseph Grant help her do such a thing? "Kelly, why is your face so red? Are you sick?" Someone noticed that something was amiss with Kelly and hurriedly went forward to pummel her. No, it's just possible that the air conditioning in the conference room was too warm." Kelly immediately replied nervously, as if she harbored some unspeakable thoughts. Alvina Miller immediately laughed. "Kelly, you have fallen for the handsome guy, right?" "Nope." Kelly immediately glared at Alvina and quickly walked forward. However, Kelly felt sweet in her heart, as if she was really falling in love with the person she loved. "Does Kelly blush just now?" Alvina Miller asked while blinking her eyes. All the girls snickered, but Kelly's face was full of shame. It was time to get off work. Alvina Miller forced her petite body to walk out of the office. This was because in order to work here, one had to maintain delicacy and etiquette at all times. As she sat in the car, Alvina Miller finally leaned crookedly against the chair. First, she stretched her body a little, then rubbed the stiffened muscles of her calf as she comforted herself with pain. In the past, she didn't like wearing high heels, But now, she had to walk back and forth in her 7 centimeters high heels every day. This truly made her difficult. "Joseph Grant, are you worth it for me to do this?" she asked with a laugh. Alvina drove the sports car and disappeared into the empty street. At the same time, a man, with his hands behind his back, stood in front of a window in the corner of the office on the 5th floor, watched the car disappear. "She goes back," Joseph Grant muttered, as his thin lips subconsciously lifted upwards. Unfortunately, he couldn't go back so early today, and he even arranged a banquet tonight. He still had an important occasion to attend. When Alvina Miller returned home, she suddenly thought that Joseph Grant would definitely not return early today. Alice, if she knew earlier, she would have directly returned to Miller family to accompany her grandfather for dinner. "No, I can't go back to Miller family now. My 2 uncles are too scary. It's better to save my life." Alvina Miller was now like a lunatic. She had no choice. She was worried that her 2 uncles would call her and ask her about the shares when she awoke. Alvina Miller opened the car door and suddenly thought of something. Just now, when she was passing by the station and stopped, she realized that the person standing there was also a stranger. Why did they not stop her car and investigate her identity? But a few days ago, she was stopped in the tracks, and said over and over again that she was only allowed to pass by Joseph Grant's woman. "You're playing with me." Alvina Miller's beautiful face changed. She was very angry. Chapter 1243. He was in reality and in dreams. The house was empty. Alvina Miller hugged her pillow and watched TV for a while. When he suddenly heard her phone ring, she quickly threw her pillow aside and pulled her phone out. Alvina Miller smiled. She had guessed that Joseph Grant would call her soon, but she hadn't expected that he would call her so quickly. "Have you eaten?" When Alvina Miller just picked up the call, she heard the man's deep concern. "No, I'm home. When are you coming back?" Alvina Miller asked softly. This house was cleaned and tidy. It was clearly comfortable, but for some reason, without him at home, Alvina Miller felt strangely lonely. "I might be a little late. What would you like to eat? I'll get someone to send it over to you." Joseph Grant's intention in making this call was to prepare some dinner for her. She might even directly eat instant noodles when she was alone at home, because 2 days ago, when he returned late, he discovered that Alvina did not have a proper meal by herself. "Really? Then I won't eat the instant noodles. I'll wait for you to get someone to send it over." Alvina Miller immediately burst out laughing like a child who had gotten candy. "Then wait a moment. I've already sent someone to pack." Joseph Grant could almost imagine her happiness. It was so easy to be satisfied with just her status as the young miss. Wasn't she too discounted? "Joseph Grant, are you busy right now? I think you must have a lot to do today." When Alvina Miller remembered that dinner was ready, she was happy and started to chat with him. "I'm going to go eat dinner. I call you while I am in the bathroom." Joseph Grant could not help but chuckle. "Are so busy. All right then, you can do it first. Remember to come back early after you're done." Alvina Miller was like a little wife in charge of management. Even though she had sent him her concern, she didn't forget to remind him that he had returned early. "All right, return after I have done with my work. Take care of yourself and hang up first." The man's gentle voice didn't contain a single trace of impatience. After he said that, he was still waiting for Alvina to hang up the phone. Alvina Miller secretly laughed, and then truly hung up. Joseph Grant had made arrangements for Alvina Miller's dinner, So at around 6:30, someone brought Alvina 3 dishes and a soup. It was both delicious and nutritious. After Alvina Miller gratefully sent the auntie off, she hummed this delicacy alone. She ate well. What should she do next? Right? She wanted to learn. Ever since she joined the job, Alvina Miller realized that she had all kinds of shortcomings, such as lacking of interpersonal relationships. Therefore, she wanted to read more about social interaction, and whether or not she could find some kind of experience that could help her with her work. At the beginning, Alvina Miller was still staring at her phone with interest, looking and thinking, but after less than half an hour, she already felt that the words on her phone were jumping up and down. No, I can't sleep. It wasn't that the words were jumping, but that her eyelids were struggling from being sleepy. Alvina Miller slapped her face hard with both hands, forcing herself to continue reading. Reading helped to improve, and it certainly had many benefits. Only, theoretically speaking, why would it be so difficult to put it into practice? In the end, Alvina Miller still held onto her phone and curled up in her blanket, and fell asleep in a trance. It was unknown how long she slept when she felt a pair of eyes staring at her. The feeling was very strong, causing Alvina Miller to think that she was dreaming, and brought Joseph Grant into her dreams. She opened her eyes groggily and saw that the man was sitting on her bed. He was helping her to straighten her hair. Joseph Grant? Alvina Miller muttered his name. The man didn't reply, but his gaze became a few times gentler. His thin lips also curled up into a smile. Am I dreaming? For a moment, Alvina Miller could not differentiate between reality and dreams, because the light in the room was very dim and only the walls were lit. The surroundings were still completely gray, and only the position of the bed could be seen clearly. It was somewhat similar to the scene in her dreams. She stretched out her hand in a daze and clasped the big hand that the man put on her quilt. Hot? Alvina Miller was burned by the man's hot palm, so she quickly retracted her hand. Her beautiful eyes widened as she stared at the man. Are you tired after working all day? Seeing her foolish look, Joseph Grant could not help but laugh at her muddle-headedness and cuteness. When do you get back? Alvina Miller felt that she had lost her face, so she quickly straightened her hair and reached for her phone to check the time. I just get back. Have you eaten yet? Joseph Grant could not help but ask softly. Alvina Miller touched her face a little embarrassedly, and laughed dryly. Why do you keep asking me if I've eaten? It's as if I'm a pig, eating and eating all day. Joseph Grant frowned. His expression became serious, yet he still laughed out loud. How can you scold yourself like this? I'm afraid that you'll get hungry, so I'll always ask you, if you don't like my care and concern. No, I like it. I like the way you care about me, just like my grandfather used to. When Alvina Miller heard this, her eyes widened in shock. Her two small hands instinctively reached out to grab Joseph's sleeves. Oh, when Joseph Grant heard the first few words, he was happy, but when he heard the last sentence, his tone dragged his words, and even his handsome face became ugly. When I was young, my grandfather often worried that I would starve, so he asked people to prepare delicious foods for me every day. You probably don't know that before I was 13, I was still a little fatty. Alvina Miller was extremely mental. She did not notice that the man's expression was strange, and continued to lower her head and mock herself. Is that so? That makes sense. Joseph Grant looked around her body and nodded for some reason. What makes sense? Alvina Miller looked at him confusedly. Why did she feel that his words were so profound and unfathomable? I can see that you're not fat at all, but there's one place where you're obviously fat. In order to punish her for not speaking properly earlier, Joseph Grant had intentionally teased her. Where's the fat? My waist. Or my legs. She believed that any woman would be the most afraid of hearing these words. This was a complete negation of her beauty. Neither. Joseph Grant clearly only wanted to joke around with her, but at that moment, his gaze unconsciously landed on her chest. Alvina Miller hadn't even taken a bath yet. She had only taken off her outer clothes and was wearing a white shirt. At this moment, she had untied one button at some point in time, revealing a small part of her bosom. Even though the lighting was abnormally dim, the man's gaze was extremely sharp. He was able to see the entire shape immediately. He had to admit that he was very satisfied with it. Being guided by his eyes, Alvina Miller also lowered her head to look at her chest. In the next second, she hurriedly reached out and hugged herself, and glared at the man with a pair of angry eyes. Where are you looking? You're not allowed to look. Joseph Grant's handsome face flushed. He, who was usually calm and strict, was now treated as an immoral person by the man. This was his first time experiencing something like this, which made him a little shy. It's getting late. You should get some rest as well. You still have to go to work tomorrow. Joseph Grant quickly changed the topic and wanted to leave. Wait a minute. Seeing that he was about to leave, Alvina Miller was actually not willing to part, and anxiously said. Joseph Grant suddenly stood up and looked at her condescendingly. Is there anything else? That. My legs are sore. Do you have any medicine? I need it. Alvina Miller did not want to prove anything, but her calves were truly sore and sore. This feeling was as if she had climbed up a mountain and came down with the side effects. If she did not put on some medicine, she would not have to continue working in her high heels tomorrow. Does your leg hurt? Wait for me. The expression in Joseph Grant's eyes became slightly startled. In the next second, he turned around and quickly walked out. When he came in again, he actually had a bottle of medicinal wine in his hand. Judging from the package, it should be pretty good as well. Extend your legs. Let me see. Joseph Grant immediately sat back on her bed and requested softly. There's no need for that. You keep the medicine. I'll take a bath first before applying it. Alvina Miller's beautiful eyes stared blankly for a moment. She never thought that Joseph Grant would actually take the initiative to help her massage her legs. Chapter 1244. Got this man angry. Let a man rub it for her? Alvina Miller still had a moral bottom line. Although today at work, she heard a girl say that she wanted to find a boyfriend to massage her. At the time, Alvina also hoped that Joseph Grant, as her boyfriend, would help her to do that. However, Alvina Miller resisted in her heart if such a scene was to be played out now. Hold it out. Don't be shy. Seeing her blushing, Joseph Grant immediately treated her as though she was embarrassed, and said seriously in a low voice, There's really no need for that. I can do it myself. You've been busy with government affairs for the whole day, so you must be tired. Hurry up and take a bath. Don't worry about me. When Alvina Miller saw that his handsome face still had a trace of weariness, she ached for him, so she wanted him to hurry up and rest. Don't you trust me? Joseph Grant could not help but turn gloomy, and take this woman's rejection as displeasure. No, I'm just afraid of troubling you. Alvina Miller laughed dryly, and under the man's sincere gaze, She gently moved one leg out of the blanket. Joseph Grant did not mind. He extended his hand and grabbed her leg, and then lightly pressed on Alvina Miller's calf. Softer. That kind of aching and numb feeling was simply too pleasurable. Alvina Miller couldn't help but ask him. Joseph Grant could not hold back the serious expression on his face for a moment, and immediately laughed out loud, because this woman's pampered look really moved his heart. "What are you laughing at? I have said that my entire body is filled with rich diseases. I can't carry something on my shoulder, and I can't lift something either. My mom already said that, in the future, I will definitely suffer from a lot of pain, and only then can I become strong and independent." Now, it seems that she was right. I have to pay for the rich diseases that I suffered from when I was young, Alvina Miller muttered as she looked at him resentfully. "You're a woman, and your temper is nothing. What you lack is not a strong and independent personality, but a man who loves you dearly. Do you understand?" After listening to what she said, Joseph Grant gave her the most perfect answer. "Think about it carefully. It really makes sense, Joseph Grant. Are you the man that I lack in my entire life?" Alvina Miller did not know how to be modest and shy at all. Since Joseph Grant had mentioned the important part, she naturally had to understand a little about it. The big hand that Joseph Grant was holding onto her calf slightly stiffened, and even his thin lips tightened slightly. "If you wish me to be, then I am." After a few seconds of silence, the man answered with extreme caution. Alvina Miller saw that he was tensed up, and suddenly hid her bed with her hand and laughed uncontrollably. "Joseph Grant, are you shy? Oh my God, so Vice President's shy look is like this. It's really rare to see it." Alvina Miller, watch your words. Joseph Grant's thin lips twitched, and his fingers pressed strongly against her calf. "No, no, no. Be a bit gentler. I don't dare to laugh at you anymore. Please let me go." Alvina Miller was in so much pain that she wanted to cry. She had had enough of that feeling. Joseph Grant saw that she was really in pain, so he could only stop teasing her. He extended his hand and opened the bottle of medicinal wine, and smeared it on her palm. "It's going to hurt a little at the beginning, because your muscles might be injured. Do you not wear high heels?" Before Joseph Grant used a bit of force to help her massage it while diverting her attention. "Yeah, I used to wear flat shoes. Now that I'm at work, I have no choice but to wear high heels. Alice, women really suffer. Why must they wear high heels? Why don't you let the men pay us back?" Alvina Miller grit her teeth, and during the pain as she grumbled, "Tomorrow, I'll get someone to change this rule. How many centimeters of high heels are you all wearing now?" When Joseph Grant heard her complaints, he suddenly thought about how terrifying it would be for a man to wear high heels to work. After that, he decided to let her be at ease. 7 centimeters. Alvina Miller looked at him with blinking eyes. "Then I'll have someone cut the heel of the shoe by 2 centimeters tomorrow. It would be more comfortable to wear," Joseph Grant said very humanly. Really, Alvina Miller couldn't believe that her complaints could make him change the rules. It's true, Joseph Grant did not have any intention to joke around with her, and earnestly nodded his head. The smile on Alvina Miller's mouth reached the depths of her eyes, and she suddenly pounced forward and hugged Joseph Grant directly, and said uncontrollably, "Thank you, Joseph Grant. You are truly too awesome. You will definitely be a good leader in the future." Joseph Grant was suddenly hugged by her. His entire body became a string. After listening to her praise, he felt that this hug was too official. It was not the kind of hug he had for love. "Let go," Joseph Grant said with a low voice. Alvina Miller obediently released her hand. The smile on her face did not decrease, and her beautiful eyes secretly glanced at him. "Do you do this for me?" "Right." "No." Joseph Grant also didn't know what was wrong, but he didn't want her to be too complacent. "Well, even if it isn't for me, for all of us female sisters, I still want to thank you. So I've decided to agree to one of your requests," Alvina Miller said complacently. Joseph Grant was helpless against her thoughts, but at the same time speechless. He was happy enough that she was grateful to him. "What do you want?" "Think about it carefully. How about I buy you a present tomorrow?" Alvina Miller immediately took the initiative to suggest. "You don't need to buy any more. Don't randomly spend money for me in the future." Joseph Grant thought about the suit and shirt she had gifted him last time. They were expensive, and even if she was rich, he didn't want her to spend this much on him. "I'd love to." When Alvina Miller heard him say no, her heart was stuffy for a moment. If he didn't want it, did it mean that there was no place for her in his heart? Joseph Grant's finger was still gently rubbing and pressing on her thigh, and a warm feeling was transmitted from his palm into Alvina Miller's body bit by bit. She felt extremely comfortable, and couldn't help but want to go back to sleep. "Joseph Grant." Alvina Miller's mind was still clear. She glared at the ceiling and called out his name. "N." The man replied softly, indicating that he was listening. "Tell me, can we really get married?" Alvina Miller blinked her eyes and asked in anticipation. "Why do you ask?" Joseph Grant was also startled, and even his fingers had stopped moving. "Nothing, just curious. The man I thought of for was a creature that I couldn't understand, from childhood until now, when my father left early. My grandfather was very good to me. Whatever it was, he helped me do it. I just need to enjoy it and have it. I think my grandfather is too spoiled me. Let me ask for men every day. Sometimes I think, no one in this world will love me like my grandfather. Even if there is one, he can't love me with his heart. He must be for my money." Ouch! Before Alvina Miller could finish lamenting, she felt a sharp pain from her lower leg. With a cry that came from the bottom of her heart, she jumped up like a fish and glared at Joseph Grant angrily. "Why are you pinching me? Do you know how painful it is?" "It's because I want to make you hurt that." "Do you know what you just said?" Joseph Grant's handsome face became gloomy. "What do I say?" Alvina Miller was really a forgetful person. "You said a man is good to you for your money." Joseph Grant was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Was his sincerity really so worthless? Seeing that he was angry, or was it because of what she had said? Alvina Miller could not help but burst out laughing. "Are you angry? I'm not talking about you. I'm most of the people. You are the minority. No matter how much money you have, I won't take it. You just rest assured." Joseph Grant was still angry, because the girl's words made him unhappy. "Don't be like this. If we get married in the future, I will definitely split half of my wealth with you." "I don't want to." Hearing that she still dared to continue the conversation on this topic, Joseph Grant's handsome face became even darker and uglier. "You don't want it for nothing. This is according to the law, the property between husband and wife." Alvina Miller, what do you think of me? Joseph Grant was so angry that he vomited blood. Chapter 1245, The Anguish of Not Being Able to Talk. Hearing the man calling her by her name, Alvina Miller finally raised her head. and saw the man's handsome face that was so gloomy that droplets of water were about to fall. Oh, did she really say something wrong to piss him off? Joseph Grant's big palm was still holding on to one of her calf, and seeing her raise her head and stare at him in a daze, the slightly opened lips actually made him dazed for a moment. Don't say that anymore. Joseph Grant also felt that he had the intention to anger her just now, but after thinking carefully, why did he have to fuss about it with a girl whose intelligence was still at the level of an elementary school? I won't say any more. Alvina Miller also quickly lowered her head to reflect on herself. She knew that men liked sensible women. She was indeed a bit too noisy just now. Joseph Grant rubbed on one of her legs for a while, then allowed her to stretch out her other leg. Alvina Miller very obediently gave him the other leg. The man's finger was filled with medicinal wine, rubbing it time and time again. Alvina Miller felt that the feeling of being needed by him was pretty good, and the pain had lessened a lot. Joseph Grant, don't you say your mother would come over? Is she temporarily not coming? Alvina Miller smiled and asked him. I asked her to come over tomorrow night. I'm rather busy today. Joseph Grant's gaze lightly swept across her face and stopped at her two slender and snow-white legs. The girl's skin was young and smooth, and the feeling of touching her palm was really good. It made him feel like he didn't want to let go. You're tired too. How about I massage your shoulders later? I have some experience in this area. My grandpa often asks me help him massage his back. Alvina Miller felt that just being able to enjoy it made her feel a little uncomfortable, so she suggested that she exchange it with Joseph. All right, Joseph Grant agreed almost without thinking. Alvina Miller asked him to squeeze her back a few more times, then retracted her legs, preparing to massage Joseph's shoulders. The softness on his palm suddenly disappeared, and Joseph Grant's 5 fingers that had not been tightened enough time, stiffened for a second, and in the end, he clenched into a fist and placed on his thigh. Alvina Miller jumped up from the bed, went around to his back, and half knelt. He was tall, and Alvina half knelt behind his back just fine. I'm going to start now. Alvina Miller clenched her 2 fists tightly and rained down on the man's shoulders. Originally, Joseph Grant did not expect her to be able to help him get rid of all his fatigue, but the force of her quick hammering was like a playful kitten scratching him. It was no longer a feeling of enjoyment for him, but torture. Do I need to increase my strength? A girl's soft exhale came from behind him. Sure. Joseph Grant nodded. Only then did Alvina Miller use more strength to punch him. Following that, her 2 small hands released and pinched his shoulders. Only then did she realize that the man's shoulders were simply too strong and wide, and her 2 small hands were unable to grip him. Cough. Is that okay? When her fingers touched the man's shoulder, Alvina realized that the man's figure was not bad when she touched a little. Alvina Miller tensed up for a moment, and used a light cough to hide her thoughts. Very good. Joseph Grant felt that she was gradually starting to pant, and his thin lips unconsciously curled up into a smile. He had seen that a spoiled woman like her wouldn't even have much strength to hit someone, but if she only pinched his shoulder a few times, then his breathing wouldn't be able to keep up with her rhythm. Then, if it was any other movement, Joseph Grant's throat could not help rolling twice, as he tried his best to suppress the thoughts in his mind. Unknowingly, listening to her breathing more quickly, he was completely unable to control his own heart. All right, stop pinching me. In the end, Joseph Grant still decided to stop her from continuing. He was afraid that the final result would not be to remove his fatigue, but to increase the burden on his body. However, Alvina Miller was a little unsatisfied, because she was secretly rubbing his back or arms, trying to reach for more information. Now that this man wasn't going to let her pinch him, she could only grieve for him. You guys' bodies are so different from ours. The muscles on your shoulders look like they're made of steel. The way I squeeze your hands look like they're sore. But you don't seem to have much of a reaction, Alvina Miller said while smiling and stretching her wrist. What kind of reaction do you want? Joseph Grant's thin lips revealed a slight smile, feeling that what she said was very cute. I just want to hear a few hums from you. I am trying my best to hit you just now, Alvina Miller said very straightforwardly. Then, does my reaction of here count as one? Joseph Grant looked down, his eyes filled with tricking, staring straight at her. Alvina Miller did not expect that the man would suddenly make such a joke out of her, her large eyes following his gaze, as if he was embarrassed. Joseph Grant stood up quickly, not letting her look any further, his back facing her, and said, I need to go shower, rest early. After saying that, without waiting for the woman behind him to reply, he walked out in a sorry state. Alvina Miller sat on the bed like a log. Oh my God, what did she just see? Too much. Alvina Miller's face was flushed red. She scolded in anger. Joseph Grant was really fleeing in panic. The reaction in his body was completely unprecedented. The woman merely gasped for breath beside his ear. It was as if he had taken some medicine, and his entire body was in a strange state. Damn it. Joseph Grant was upset with his reaction. He had seen much beautiful women before, and he had seen many of them. However, there had never been a time where he was in such a sorry state. He can't get away with the cold bath tonight. The next morning, Alvina Miller walked down the stairs while humming a small tune. She was only dressed in her work attire, a black suit, a white shirt, a one-word skirt, flesh-colored stockings, and a pair of high heels. It was extremely simple, but also filled with intellectual elegance. Her long hair was tied into a ponytail and was tied behind her head, revealing her smooth and plump forehead as well as her exquisite and beautiful face. Mr. Vice President, what delicious thing do you cook? Alvina Miller went downstairs and directly walked into the kitchen. She did not treat herself as an outsider at all. As she stood beside the man with her hands behind her back and her eyes looking into the pot, Joseph Grant was cooking pasta for her. Seeing her spirited look, a smile flashed in the depths of his eyes. Does your leg still hurt? Joseph Grant whispered as he looked down, and saw her pair of straight and slender legs. It doesn't hurt anymore. Your medicinal wine is very effective. So why don't you give it to me again tonight? All right, I'll help you massage when we get back from dinner tonight. Joseph Grant didn't mind. On the contrary, he replied very considerate. No, 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 I won't trouble you. I can do it myself. Thinking about the man's reaction last night, Alvina Miller was extremely embarrassed. She decided not to joke with him anymore. Why, isn't it better if I need it? Mr. Vice President looked at her sadly. On the other hand, Alvina Miller did not expect Joseph Grant to ask such a question. Men and women shouldn't be too intimate with each other. We're not even married yet, so we still need to have a moral bottom line, right? Alvina Miller replied him with a beaming smile. The sadness in Joseph Grant's eyes faded, and his cold and restrained temperament returned to normal. What you're reminding me is that we should arrange our marriage as soon as possible. Alvina Miller. That was definitely not what she meant. Joseph Grant scooped up the soft-cooked noodles to control the water, his fingers skillfully tripping over the sauce, but his handsome face was gloomy and ugly. He immediately treated Alvina Miller's excuse as a refusal. Alvina Miller also felt that the atmosphere became awkward and she couldn't help but sniff. How about I go to work first? You eat by yourself. Don't even think about coming out of this door until you finish eating this bowl of noodles, Joseph Grant said in an extremely overbearing manner. Only then did Alvina Miller walk over gloomily, and picked up her noodles, and said in a low voice, "Thank you." Of course, she wanted to eat it. She only wanted to slip away because she felt that the atmosphere wasn't right. Chapter 1246. Vice President was so considerate. Alvina Miller quickly drove her car to the office. Upon stepping in, she felt that others were looking at her strangely, so she wondered that had she done anything wrong? Alvina, I hear that your boyfriend is also working in the office. Which one is he? That's right. Let's be colleagues for a round. Don't keep it a secret. If we accidentally fall in love with your boyfriend in the future, the friendship boat might flip at any time. Right? I'm also very curious. I wonder which young genius it is. His family background must be very good, and he must be very good to you. Otherwise, with your family background being so good, do you still need to come here to work? Hearing her colleague's questions, Alvina Miller involuntarily turned towards Kelly. Kelly also felt that she was being ungrateful, and lowered her head in shame, not daring to look Alvina in the eye. Sisters, look at the time first. Miss Carl is about to arrive. If you're not afraid of being implicated by me. The girls around her immediately scattered, thinking about Carl Black's selfless face. How could they still have the time to gossip? Alvina Miller directly walked towards Kelly, but before she could ask anything, Kelly had already stood up with a face full of self-blame. Alvina Miller, I'm sorry, I only speak up while accidentally chatting with them. Are you angry at me? Alvina Miller was a little angry just now. But when Alvina saw Kelly proactively admit her mistake, and Alvina thought that she had implicated Kelly before, so she smiled. No, I'm not angry. It's just something like I have a boyfriend, which is really not good for others to know. Don't worry, if you have any other secrets in the future, I will definitely not speak carelessly again. I promise. Kelly immediately raised her hand and swore. All right, I believe you. Alvina Miller could only forget about this matter. However, although Alvina Miller did not pursue the matter further, the news that she came here to work for his boyfriend like the wind spread out quickly. All the women in the office were guessing which one of them was Alvina Miller's boyfriend. Alvina Miller was about to go crazy when she heard it. Heavens, this matter definitely could not be transmitted to Joseph Grant's ears. Otherwise, that man would definitely blame her for spouting nonsense. However, things that people didn't want to happen happened in the first place. That was the way things were. In the noon, Joseph Grant was participating in an important event outside, when he suddenly heard the aide whispering to him, "Sir, I just received some news. It's about Miss Miller." What happened to her? Joseph Grant's expression tensed up. That woman always made him worried, so when he heard about her, he was naturally worried. There are rumors that Miss Miller herself leaks the news that she goes to work there for her boyfriend. Today, Many people are guessing who her boyfriend is, and there are already several men who are treated as suspects. The aide de camp's expression was also nervous. He was a person in the know, and after hearing so many false rumors, he truly felt wronged for the vice president. Is there such a thing? Joseph Grant scrunched his eyebrows. As expected, Alvina had caused a disaster. Do we need to deal with this matter? The aide asked cautiously. Let her go. Joseph Grant reached out his hand to stroke his forehead. Was she really the one who leaked the news? In the first dining hall, Alvina Miller stayed well with a group of beauties in the office because of herself. Destructed. These beauties were originally out in the open, but now that Alvina Miller had a boyfriend, she was no longer their public enemy, so they could treat her as a friend. Alvina, who exactly is it? Couldn't he just reveal a little bit of information? So secretive. That's right, we've already guessed it all morning, and our brains are all bulging. Alvina Miller was also extremely distressed. At this moment, she could only reveal a pleading expression. Sisters, please let me go. I am already ashamed enough. Can you stop talking about this matter? I tell you the truth. I don't know if we are the lover, but if you continue to heckle us, we'll really be in trouble. Alvina, you can't be unrequited love, right? Secret love. Alvina Miller did not expect everyone to look at her with a sympathetic gaze. Her brain was clever and quickly nodded. Yes, I am secretly in love with him, but I have not confessed to him. So, you all, don't talk about me anymore, okay? Alice, Alvina, your condition is so good. Which kind of man is worthy of you having a crush on him? Unless it's Mr. Vice President. Right, Alvina. To be honest, is it him? Kelly clenched her chopsticks tightly and stared at Alvina Miller with a pair of eyes filled with resentment. Alvina Miller was also shocked at heart, but luckily her face did not change at all, and immediately said with a self-deprecating tone, "How is that possible? Is Mr. Vice President who I can't think of? You really think too much." That's true. If we're talking about a secret love, then among all the beauties here, which one of them is secretly in love with the Mr. Vice President? I am one of them. Alice, Mr. Vice President is so handsome and gentle. He really has the charm of a man. Me too. If one day Mr. Vice President can speak to me and look at me again, my experience will soar to the skies. Kelly's grip on the chopsticks became tighter and tighter, and she was about to break the chopsticks when she suddenly ridiculed. Do you all wake up from your daydream? The Mr. Vice President is incomparably noble. Is someone like us even worth mentioning? Kelly, don't be so serious. Everyone is joking around. Alvina Miller quickly tried to smooth things over. Even if you're joking, there's still a limit to it. If Miss Carl knows that you're using the Mr. Vice President's reputation to joke around, then there's not a good result for you. Kelly still reminded her with a cold expression. No one said anything in that instant. Indeed, how could below-level employees dare to bite the tongues of Vice President? Was the rice bowl too heavy? Alvina Miller secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, everyone had treated it as a joke, and if someone really wanted to continue the investigation, then everything would be exposed. When Alvina Miller thought about meeting Joseph Grant's mother again in the evening, her scalp turned numb. It was over. She really didn't have any confidence at all. Alvina Miller, at 8 o'clock in the evening, a guest is coming to attend a meeting. You stay behind, Carl Black suddenly said, scaring Alvina Miller away. Miss Carl, I have something urgent to do tonight. Can you change to someone else? It depends on the severity of the matter. Since you're working here, you should prioritize your work. So it's settled with you, Carl Black said in an indifferent tone. No, Alvina Miller just sat there in a daze. Was there really such a coincidence in this world? She was actually working overtime that night when she met her future mother-in-law. What should she do? She had to tell Joseph Grant, or he would change the day. Alvina Miller lowered her head, took out her phone and sent a message. Soon, she received a reply. Do you have to work overtime tonight? It just so happens that my mom doesn't have time to come over today, so I'll work overtime with you. Alvina Miller's expression instantly relaxed. Mrs. Grant was also not free today. That was truly great. Kelly, you accompany Alvina Miller for now. I'll help you apply for your reward for this month. Carl Black felt that Alvina Miller was unreliable and had to arrange an old employee to watch over her. All right, thank you, Miss Carl. Kelly's face lit up, and she was naturally exceptionally happy. One must know that the prize money for a month wasn't a small amount. When Alvina Miller heard that there was someone accompanying her, she was obviously overjoyed. Kelly, fortunately you work overtime. Otherwise, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to handle it. Yes, we are colleagues. We should be looking after each other. Kelly was happy, and her words became more pleasant to listen to. Time passed bit by bit. It was 8:30 in the evening, and after all the guests had finished their dinner, Alvina and Kelly still had to come over for a meeting. When Alvina and Kelly were free, they were standing at the corridor outside the conference room waiting for the response. Kelly suddenly said softly, "Have you heard the Vice President issue an order today? From now on, our women's high heels are only 2 centimeters shorter." Really? When does this happen? Why, I do hear of it. Alvina Miller smiled for some unknown reason. It is released in the afternoon. Mr. Vice President is so nice, so considerate of women. Kelly could not help but exclaim, a trace of a shy smile flashing across her eyes. Chapter 1247. His romance is real. Kelly's words made Alvina Miller smile lightly. She did not expect Joseph Grant to make such a rule so quickly. He had kept his word. Just as the two of them were standing there waiting for the end of the meeting, a person suddenly walked over. It was a woman who was also a famous Iron Lady in the Foreign Ministry. Alvina and Kelly were shocked by the woman's aura in an instant. They were just about to be lazy, and now they stood up straight. "Please come with me to the office. My assistant is off duty. I'd like a cup of coffee to refresh myself. Can you help me make a cup?" The lady spoke out, and looked at Alvina Miller. All right. Alvina Miller did not dare to reject. This was her superior. Kelly looked at her with sympathy. That woman was famous for being cautious. When Alvina Miller went to work for her, Kelly was afraid that Alvina would be scolded harshly. If the situation was serious, Alvina might even lose her job. Alvina Miller was also secretly complaining that who did she offend today? She had to work overtime, yet she still had to deal with such a serious superior request. Alvina Miller secretly looked at Kelly for help, but Kelly pretended not to see. Kelly did not want to offend this woman and lose her job. Alvina Miller knew that Kelly might not help her. "Alice, forget it. If there was really something difficult, it would be better if she went herself." Alvina Miller anxiously followed the woman who had a strong reputation on the scene. After walking a few steps, the woman suddenly stopped, and turned her head, staring at Alvina Miller's face for a few seconds. Finally, She smiled faintly. Don't worry, I am Joseph Grant's aunt. He asked me to call you over. Alvina Miller was overwhelmed by the unexpected favor, and looked at Isabella Gessner with disbelief. Turn left to the second guest room. Go. Isabella Gessner did not say anything unnecessary and just gave her a direction. Thank you. And Alvina Miller was still holding onto her breath earlier, but now that she saw Isabella Gessner's gentle expression, she immediately bent down and expressed her gratitude. Then, she turned and ran towards the second guest room with slightly hurried steps. Seeing her impatient look, Isabella Gessner couldn't help but smile. This girl looked very cute, and the nephew that accompanied her was not bad. The situation had suddenly changed. Before Alvina Miller could regain her senses, she pushed open the door and was immediately surprised. Joseph Grant, what are you doing? You scare me to death. Alvina Miller pushed the door and entered, seeing that the man was standing in front of the window, looking deeply out. She could not help but scold him. Hearing her voice, Joseph Grant turned around with a smile on his face. He removed the cold gaze from the bottom of his eyes and became extremely gentle. Why do I scare you? You make a mistake again, and are you feeling guilty? Joseph Grant asked while laughing softly. He walked up to her and saw that her pretty face was still a little white. He reached out to caress her head. I can't possibly go out and see you myself. I call you over. I just want to ask you, have you eaten dinner? I just ate 2 hamburgers in a hurry in the cafeteria. Don't tell me you're planning to get someone to bring me something good to eat again. Alvina Miller heard the man ask about her eating once again, and a sweet taste appeared in her heart. Although she felt that Joseph Grant didn't have any romantic feelings towards her, but this kind of genuine concern made one's heart unsettled. Alice, it must be because he looked good. So even if his romance was just concerned about her dressing and eating every day, it would still confuse the world. It's not really anything delicious. It's just that someone give me these biscuits and chocolates. If you haven't eaten your fill, you can eat some of these snacks as well. As Joseph Grant said this, he turned around and brought over a blue wrapping bag. Inside the bag were fine wrapped biscuits and chocolate. Why would someone give you these things? It must be a woman, right? The first thing Alvina Miller saw wasn't that she wanted to eat it immediately, but to squint her beautiful big eyes and question him sourly. Joseph Grant could not help but chuckle. You guess right. This was given to me by a diplomat's wife yesterday. There are also people who sent it to me in the past, but I didn't receive it. I was unable to refuse it yesterday, and now that there's you at home, I accepted it. If I don't eat it, you will definitely eat it. Alvina Miller snorted. Don't you want to say that you take this gift for me, and even explained it to me? Are you jealous? Seeing her pouting, Joseph Grant could not help but ask with a smile. Alvina Miller's body trembled. She was startled. Then she stared at him in embarrassment. I'm not jealous. If there are more girls giving you these in the future, you can take them all. It just so happens that I like eating snacks. After Alvina Miller finished speaking, she sat down and opened up a biscuit. Smelling it, she said, it's the fragrance of osmanthus flowers. It's very tasty. Seeing her eat so much with such care, Joseph Grant couldn't help but sit beside her. His handsome face leaned over and said, you can try for it first. Let's see if you like it. Alvina Miller opened her mouth and bit into a piece of biscuit. The biscuit made a caw-caw sound between her snow-white teeth. Delicious. You have to try for it too. After Alvina Miller said, She passed the biscuit that she had taken a bite off to Joseph. "It's worth it. It's really delicious. I rarely eat sweets." Joseph Grant looked at the biscuit that she had bitten, and his sore rolled a little. "You dislike me." Only then did Alvina Miller realize that he had gone too far in forcing others to eat things that she had already bitten into. Thus, she hurriedly moved to take another piece, but she didn't expect that the piece in her hands would be taken away by the man. Following that, the piece of biscuit was eaten by him. Alvina Miller's beautiful face flushed red. After that, she quickly lowered her head and pretended that nothing was wrong as she grabbed a chocolate bar. She unwrapped it absent-mindedly and then placed it by her mouth. "Are you tired from working overtime?" The man beside her was whispering his concern for her. What time is it now? I need to go back to work." Alvina Miller suddenly thought that she was still working overtime. How could she come here to talk about love with Joseph Grant? "Stay a little longer." The man grabbed her wrist when she stood up. In the next second, she was forcefully dragged back onto the sofa. Her body bumped into him by accident, and she could feel the man's hard shoulders. Do the vice president not care about slacking off at work? Alvina Miller was embarrassed, and she began to mutter, "If it is you, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to control it." Joseph Grant replied with an enchanting smile. Alvina Miller's soft spot on her heart was struck by his words. She could not help but laugh. "Why can't you control it? Am I that scary?" "You're not scary. I just can't bear to care about you," Joseph Grant said. He suddenly extended his hand out and pulled her into his embrace. Normally, this would be a very strict place. Now that Alvina Miller was being embraced by this man, she immediately felt a sense of guilt and quickly pushed him away. All right, I know you miss me, like me. What you want to say is that I already know. I have to go." "Wait a moment, you should eat these." Joseph Grant's handsome face tensed up, and he quickly stood up, bringing the box to catch up with her. "Won't you be mine when you bring it home?" When Alvina Miller opened the door, she looked back and blinked her eyes at him. Her cute fairy-like appearance caused Joseph Grant's body to tremble. Joseph Grant could be considered to have completely fallen this time. He did not expect that when a woman barged into his life, she would bring him such a strange and joyous feeling. Alvina Miller returned to the place where Kelly was, as if she was escaping for her life. When Kelly saw her running over, she immediately asked with concern, "What's wrong? Were you scolded?" Alvina Miller did not dare to speak the truth. She shook her head and replied, "No, just that. You don't steal the coffee, did you?" Kelly's gaze swept across her face and immediately asked, "No," Alvina Miller quickly replied. "Then, what are those words on your mouth? Hurry up and wipe them away. What do you steal to eat?" Kelly kindly took out a tissue from her pocket and gave it to her. Alvina Miller quickly wiped it off and saw that there was some chocolate crumbs at the corner of her mouth. Alvina Miller muttered in her heart, "Why doesn't Joseph Grant remind her just now?"